Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week we are joined by author of Dark Mirror, writer for The Atlantic, and senior fellow at Century Foundation, and a Princeton professor, Bart Gellman. Remember, we take your questions each episode, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, and don't forget to tell us where you're from. And please check out the links to this week's sponsors, Magic Spoon and Blinkist, in the show notes. We thank you for supporting them. It really helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Hey, James, there's a big story this week about Biden and Putin, 2-hour virtual meeting as Russian troops threaten Ukraine. But I'll just send our listeners to one of our favorite guests, the New York Times' David Sanger, who's written the authoritative account. You can touch on that if you want, but to shift to back home, you are exuberant, rationally exuberant about the economy.
Who couldn't be? I mean, they keep revising these job numbers up. It's like one of the biggest years of job creation we ever had. 4 million people again in October, just like September, quit their jobs. 11 million job openings. The stories everywhere about companies planning wage increases in 2022. It's not me. I can't find any bad economic news out there, but other than inflation, which the 10-year Treasury is trading at under 1.5%. So the bond market doesn't seem to be that worried about it. But I don't know what evidence there is that anything is wrong with this economy at all. This is as good a economy. It might have been the best economy we had since World War II was the 90s. This economy may be better than the 90s. It's just unbelievable. And at some point, I'm sorry, if it continues, at some point, I'm hopeful that it'll kick in and people realize, damn, it's a lot better off than I was in 2020.
Well, I agree with you with two caveats. One is if the new COVID variant, if it doesn't prove more lethal, then I think we're right. If it does, and we're not sure yet, there are some encouraging signs, but then I look at some states that are just seeing these tremendous surge in COVID cases. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but that's at least a caveat. And James, I'm not quite as persuaded as you are that even if it's all true, it's going to significantly affect the 2022 dynamics. It should,
right?
But I don't know that it will.
I didn't say it would. I said if it kicks in, but it's a simple fact. You're right.
Yeah.
If you want to look at, well, maybe COVID's, but there's some kind of variant that's going to take off. Maybe so. Maybe no one will figure out that, gee, I'm making more money and have job security than I had before. But the fact that this economy is booming is just that. It is a fact. Now, we can try to, the other thing that is a fact is political science has pretty much told us that presidential job approval is very much dependent on economic growth. Well, if that's true, come this summer, Biden's job approval ought to be like 60%. But again, I'm not saying this is. I'm saying definitively. Well, I understand that, for Christ's sake. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm just saying that it is undoubtedly the truth that this economy is booming, and I'm saying that it is undoubtedly true that historically a president's job approval has been tied to the performance of the economy. If that holds up, I think the Democrats have a shot to do well in 2022 as long as they don't shoot themselves in the feet.
Well, they may. I've never seen I cannot recall ever a midterm election with an economy booming like this, at least not a first midterm election. Not in recent history, right. So we don't have any.
We had a pretty good economy in '94, and we got closed because we couldn't talk about
James.
it.
Come on, James. It wasn't even close.
As you know what I said earlier in the show,
5.5% unemployment rate.
It may be
4.
It was getting a lot better, but it doesn't matter. I'm really not arguing. I'm saying this could be the strongest. The '90s until this was the strongest economy it had since World War II. I don't know. I'll let economic people figure this out, but this one looks to me, to be now the '90s recovery lasted a long time. But hopefully, this one will last through 2024.
Yeah.
But I'm not arguing. Understand? I'm not arguing with anybody. I'm just stating the fact. Man, the economy was pretty good in '94. It took a while. I was there. By '96, we were able to talk about it successfully. But I don't know what, it's very difficult in politics when the economy starts getting better. If you tell people it's better, they don't think it is. They think you're clueless. But at some point, this shit's got to kick in. At least I hope.
Well, this is uncharted waters, and maybe it'll be really good for Biden and Democrats. I sure hope so. I'll tell you one thing about Biden. He made the right call, I believe, in the 2022 Winter Olympics in China. There are going to be two sides that aren't going to be pleased. The right-wing constant critics like Tom Cotton and some of the business interests. He's not going to send diplomats and dignitaries to the Chinese Olympics, but he's not going to prohibit the athletes from participating. I think it's a middle ground, usually not the best option, but in this case it is. It sends a message, not going to change Chinese behavior, but it does send a message, and other countries already are following suit, but it doesn't penalize the athletes who worked hard for what will be the capstone of many of their careers. The 1980 boycott of the Moscow Olympics didn't change anything. So I give credit to Joe Biden in this one. He did it right.
I don't have any reason to disagree with you. I don't think anything's going to change anything, but it makes everybody feel good. So just to ignore it, I think would have been a mistake.
Right. Some of the outrages are so bad.
They're enslaving and murdering not many Uyghurs out there. No one seems to give a shit about them. But boy, one tennis star, whew,
yeah.
Katie barred the door. That's the world we live in, where fame brings attention. If you're stuck out there in Western China being hoarded and victim of a genocide, who gives a shit? But boy,
my only reservation in this is that it may be welcomed by the International Olympic Committee, and I don't like anything that the International Olympic Committee likes, but we'll put up with that.
I ran this guy unsuccessfully for president of IOC. They work for all these Olympic federations, and they're all pretty rotten to start with. I don't expect much more from them.
So when the pieces are rotten,
is international soccer any better than the IOC? I don't
know.
No. FIFA? I have no idea. No. I don't think so. But,
no.
Or the auto racing international, Bernie Ecclestone or whatever his name is.
I don't know about the auto racing, but I know the soccer isn't any better. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about Bob Dole, who died at 98. I knew Bob Dole for 50 years, and his is one extraordinary story. He came from that hard-scrabble prairie town of Russell. James, I have been to Russell, Kansas twice, and let me tell you, it is hard-scrabble. He almost died from a World War II wounds in Italy. Occurred actually a month before the war ended. He came home in a body cast. There were cigarette butts in that body cast, and his mother cried, "They used my boy as an ashtray." But with incredible resilience and courage, he fought back. I mean, this was just an incredible story. But let me tell you what is a remarkable political facet about Bob Dole. The first half of his career, he was a hatchet man, a Nixon apologist. He won a tough re-election when he really slimed his doctor opponent as an abortionist, and he talked about democratic wars. But the second half of his career, he really changed in the sense he became one of the most effective leaders in modern Senate history. On taxes, where he was in the Senate Finance Committee, he was always a conservative, but he reached out to George Mitchell, Tom Daschle, Ted Kennedy, food stamps, anti-hunger, and most significantly, the seminal 1990 Americans for Disabilities Act. That wound he received in the 10th Mountain Division in Italy left him without use of a right arm, and he remained a champion of disability rights well into his 90s. He could be a difficult, prickly man, but he was one of the American political giants of the last half-century.
He certainly was, and I obviously didn't know him as well as you did, but it always seemed like a nice guy to me, and you're right, he had significant accomplishments in the United States Senate, and he should be remembered and remembered fondly.
Yeah. He also had probably a sharper wit as we've ever seen in American politics, or at least one of the sharpest. And I can now tell, for the last time, I've told it 47 times, so I'll now tell it for the 48th time, and probably since Bob died this week, I won't tell it again, I may. But it was a gridiron speech he gave in the early 80s. And he noted that President Reagan had sent to the funeral of slain Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. He sent 3 former presidents, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Richard Nixon. And then Dole said, "See no evil, hear no evil, and evil." Only Bob Dole could do that. He was something, and rest in peace, Robert J. Dole.
So he had an event in the 1996 race. It just goes to show you Republicans were campaigning in California, actually, in 1996. It was in Chico, and he fell off the back of the stage. And he got up, he says, "At least you can just say I fell for Chico." Which I thought was a pretty good off-the-cuff line. I fell for Chico.
You know, after he lost to Bill Clinton, the next year Clinton, with great grace, gave him a Medal of Freedom.
Yeah.
And at the White House, Dole began his speech saying, "I, Robert J. Dole, do solemnly swear." Wrong speech. Clinton would tell Mary during the 96 race what he should tell Dole how to beat him. I just think it was too concerned. But he wasn't a very good candidate, and I'm frankly not sure he would have been a good president.
I don't know.
Because he had a legislative mindset.
Right.
He was a brilliant legislator. But boy, for a guy, you talk about Horatio Alger stories or whatever cliche we use, for a guy who came from, where he came from, with that war wound.
I think his marriage turned out to be, I think he had a really good marriage to Mrs. Dole. I think she took care of him. And a hearty send-off. He had a hell of a life. He's 98 years old. She'll be talking about me dying at 98.
Yeah, he did. And I'll tell you something. When he was 93, 94, he went, ex-senators have floor privileges, and the Senate was taking up a treaty to ratify the United Nations Disabilities Treaty, which would have been really good for America. Other countries would have to conform to America. But it was defeated by right-wingers because you needed 2/3, and Bob Dole was on the Senate floor lobbying people for that. That's the kind of lobbying I love.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bob Dole, we'll miss you. You gave us a good life, and you gave America an awful lot. Hey, James, there's still 3 weeks left in this year, but perhaps the most important story of 2021 is Bart Gellman's Atlantic piece entitled "Trump's Next Coup Has Already Begun." I first met Bart 34 years ago. I knew he was good, a good journalist. He is a great one. Bart, welcome. Remarkable reporting on the Trump-inspired mob and the escalating efforts for future election. Your piece is chilling. It really is chilling. I've read it twice now, and I don't feel any better after the second time. I'm still petrified. But you wrote that the Trump-inspired plot to overthrow the next election and thousands of or millions of votes will be discarded, and it's quite serious. Tell us.
Well, there are two main threads that go through the piece. One is that January 6th was not a one-off transient event that came out of the chaos of January 6th itself, but a manifestation of a very substantial and passionate and conspiratorial-minded, violent political mass movement that works on behalf of Trump, that there are tens of millions of Americans who believe both that Biden stole the White House and that violence is an appropriate and justified remedy to put Trump back in power. That's dangerous. But the other big threat is that Trump's supporters are methodically going through all the reasons why he failed to overthrow the last election. All the places where he ran into obstacles, and it is removing those obstacles and preparing the ground for him to do it again with more success next time.
And that predicate basically is to overturn, if necessary, the will of the voters to send different electors. We know some lawyers who were deeply involved with the Biden effort at post November 3, who said the big mistake that they made was that they went to the courts, and they should have gone to the state legislators and put a fix in, and that's what they're doing now, right?
That is what they're doing now. Just look at the facts on the ground. You have battleground presidential states that went for Biden narrowly, that are controlled in their state houses by Republicans. So you have a Biden state and a Republican state house, Republican state Senate. The Constitution, Article 2, gives the original power to the state legislature for appointing presidential electors. And so Trump's whole strategy depends on convincing state lawmakers to fire their voters and to send substitute votes for the other guy.
Can that be fixed? Either can you change, I guess it was a 19th century Election Count Act, or if the Senate approves this voting rights protection measure, or is that deeply embedded in the Constitution? I mean, it just seems in 200 and some years it's never been tested.
No, it hasn't, because although the founders thought it was a reasonable thing for state legislators just to appoint presidential electors and leave the voters out of it, for more than 150 years now, every state has given that power to its voters. We're accustomed to the idea that we get a say as citizens in who our president's going to be. We're accustomed to the idea of voting. But the Supreme Court found, ironically, in the Bush against Gore case in 2000, that state legislatures can take back the power to appoint electors if they want to. The question is under what circumstances and with what constraints. And so what Trump's people predictably are doing is they're pushing a doctrine in which the state legislators have unlimited power to take back the electors if they want to.
And you mentioned about disenfranchising voters. In addition to that, those laws that have been passed in places like Georgia are not nearly as so benign as the Tim Scotts would have you believe. I mean, they allow Republican-dominated boards to come in and really overrule, say, the Fulton County election results. I mean, that really is they're sparing nothing right now.
No, sparing nothing is exactly right. I mean, you look at what happened in Georgia. You had a Secretary of State who's a Republican, lifelong Republican, who did his duty faithfully, and he's certified that after counting once, twice, and three times, Joe Biden won the state in the presidential election. He certified that. Governor Kemp went ahead and signed the certification because what are you going to do with arithmetic? I mean, Biden won. He was supposed to sign it. Trump and his people went after those two. Trump is trying to unseat both of them, having endorsed candidates who espoused the big lie to replace them. Meanwhile, just in case, the state legislature has censured the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, has removed him as a voting member from the state election board, so we can't certify the next election. Right. Has created a new power for the state election board to overrule and fire county election boards in places like Fulton County, that is to say, urban and democratic places, and to simply make final decisions itself about which votes count and which ones don't count.
James.
So at the beginning of this week, I called Al. I said, my fucking phone is blowing up with this article by this guy, Bart Gellman in the Atlantic, about these crazy-ass people. I said, do you know this guy? He said, well, I know him. He was actually, I offered him a job in 1988. I don't think he'll remember. I said, I promise you, he will remember. I remember a girl that rejected me for a date in 1965. You're not going to forget someone that offered you a job. So I'm glad you're on the show. So we're a nation, I don't know, 331,492,682 people, right? Give me the best guess of how many people living in the United States are willing to engage or approve of violence to achieve a political end.
Well, there's pretty good data on that.
That's why I'm asking you.
The data says the number is something around 21 million. So that's a minority. It's not a majority. It's not even a very large minority, but it's 21 million people who think that violence is justified. And I think you see what happens if they're triggered by a political leader like Donald Trump and told, let's everyone come to Washington on January 6th and act wild and stop the certification of the vote. If he calls upon them again, they will know what to do and they will show up.
Well, 21 million, I'm just going off the top of my head with New York metropolitan areas. I think the largest metropolitan area in the country, but they're probably clocking in around 18 million. So when you think of...
That sounds about right.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure somebody will fact check me, but I don't give a shit. But there are more of these crazy-ass people than there are people living in the New York metropolitan area. Which, I mean, that's a lot of people, man.
It's a lot of people. They mostly have guns. They are passionately convinced. They have been bamboozled into believing that the last election was a fraud, that Joe Biden was an illegitimate ruler. I mean, we go back a long ways in this country, and we know what to do with illegitimate rulers. I mean, if you believe that someone has stolen the White House, that justifies a whole lot of things.
So you developed a relationship back and forth with this retired fireman in New York, who for most of his life was just a guy. Like, we know a guy. He's a fireman. He's very, very, very good at what he did, very patriotic, and it's just gone, based on your reporting, I'm not asking you to characterize it, but to me as a reader, completely batshit. Right? Is there anything that you know of that is going to change this guy's mind between now and the day he dies?
I spent a lot of time with him exactly to explore that question. Because believe it or not, I've never tried having an extended multiple hours conversation with one of these guys that over weeks and weeks of back and forth to see how the ideas would stack up. How would you respond to evidence on the other side? What really lies behind it? And I couldn't find a thing that would budge him a hair. It was very dispiriting because, I mean, this is a guy who, I live in New York. 10 years ago when he was active, if my house was on fire, I would rely on him and his discernment and his understanding of facts and his mastery of expertise to come in and save my ass. And now he believes all kinds of crazy things. And I traced them back. Said, how do you know this? Well, he says, this general says so on Rumble, the right-wing video site. So I go track down the general and I talk to him, and he's got no information at all. He's got no data, got no evidence. I show that to the firefighter, and he just doesn't believe me.
Right.
The volume of propaganda has overwhelmed him.
So you use the tape at the University of Chicago. Al and I have interviewed Kathleen Ballou, Professor Kathleen Ballou.
She's great.
Several times. Great. I think they're all sort of part of the same project. One of the things that she said is there's more females in this than you would normally think. Does that comport with what you have found in your research?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's true. If you look at the typical profile of political violence in this country, you find largely young men in their 20s, early 30s, much higher unemployment than is typical on the low end for education and so on. The January 6th insurgents were white-collar, middle-class, middle-aged, 42 years old on average, and there were lots of women among them, many more women than is typical in past episodes of political violence. Now, I know Kathleen Ballou has tracked this through the history of white supremacy, and she's got this fantastic new volume called Field Guide to White Supremacy, where you can find all you want on this. I respect her immensely.
So, when you're doing this, and what they come up with is is the FBI? I mean, the January 6th thing kind of shook me. There was some intelligence, and I'm not asking you to reveal anything confidential, but it seems to me that these people need to be infiltrated in pronto, like yesterday.
That's a really hard one because it's a really hard one for the FBI because they've been so badly burned by the accusation that they're taking sides in a political argument. And because so much of what the Trumpian right is doing is protected by the First Amendment.
But wait a minute, we're talking about. But all right, I know that's the reaction. We're talking about fucking political violence. We're not talking about what a capital gains tax cut does, or should we have a 15-week abortion limit? All right. We're talking about, like, using guns and shit, all right? I mean, if the FBI can't, the Department of Justice was created to fight the Ku Klux Klan. We used to have attorney generals, but Grant put it in there for that reason. And if these people are paralyzed with 21 million people, more people in metropolitan New York, and I'm not for going spy on the Iowa State Young Republicans Club, but it seems to me these people need to be monitored and looked out after. They're a menace to society. I mean, that's what I would say. Well,
I think I actually really wonder whether the FBI is well equipped for this. What they know how to do, and I think what they are doing, is investigating, infiltrating organized groups like Proud Boys, quasi-organized, or the Oath Keepers, or the Three Percenter Militia, or the the American Nazi Party, or that sort of thing. They're used to the idea that the threat of political violence comes from lone wolves or very small disciplined cells of violent people. They're not used to the idea of a mass movement that is ready for violence. But has where most of the people have not yet actually performed violence, and it's a hard problem.
Well, they better get on the stick because these people are numerous and dangerous, and sometimes you got to learn new things. I mean, you used to, track bootleg distillers. Now you got to track domestic terrorists. Al, I'll turn it over to you, and then I'll come.
Well, I'm going to pick up on some of that because Kathleen Ballou, who we all have such admiration for, says, look, you got to understand, you're not going to some log cabin in remote Idaho to look for these people. They have picnics. They have a softball league. They're ingrained in a lot of what we would consider normal society. I think in your piece that's what you found about the group on January the 6th. You mentioned their age. Most of them had jobs. That makes it even scarier, Bart.
Yeah, and I mean, take this firefighter. I mean, I'm convinced that you would sit down and have a drink with him and you'd like him. Right. He's a well-meaning guy.
Right, Richard Patterson. Right.
He's completely convinced, but he was prepared to grant me the status of fellow truth seeker and walk through all this stuff with me. He just couldn't. He just couldn't move, and here's part of the problem is where are they getting their news from? I mean, he pointed me to videos in which police officers were pulling back the bicycle barricades at the Capitol on January 6th. There's that one famous shot of that where they're overwhelmed in number and they can't man the barricades, and so they just remove them and walk away. And so he says, look, they invited the protesters to come in and peacefully protest. He hasn't even seen the videos in which the mob is flailing away and wailing on police with baseball bats and fire extinguishers and hockey sticks and flagpoles. He doesn't even know they exist.
And he gets his information from people like a retired 3-star general, what's his name? McInerney, who his own son says is kind of off the deep end.
Yeah, that's a ticklish one. I mean, what do you do when your dad is out there uh, blasting crazy ass conspiracy theories, and you feel like he's lost a few steps? They don't know how to shut him up. They don't want to insult him. But yeah, even his own family is worried about it and what he's saying.
And he's doing danger. And, we talked about this group, and you referred to the replacement theory, which was very important in the tragedies of the Balkans, and a number of right wingers here have talked about it, which namely our white society is being threatened by all these people of color and immigrants, and it's not the America we knew. Is that a driving force for a lot of these people, do you think, Bart?
I think it is. You can't generalize about a whole political party, but here's what we know. According to the Census Bureau, in around 2045, white people will no longer be an absolute majority of Americans. Uh, People of color are increasing in number, and we're becoming a more diverse and disparate society. And our challenge is to become a diverse, multicultural democracy and hang on to our founding values with that. The Great Replacement Theory looks with fear and loathing at the growth of minorities and says I mean, they're being told to be frightened of it. That's what Tucker Carlson's telling them on Fox News, and literally using Great Replacement as. And by the way, this is usually part of a broader conspiracy theory in which some small elite, whether it's the deep state or often Jews, are pulling the strings so that compliant minorities will come in and act against the interests of good white Christian Europeans. That if you look at Bilu's colleague at University of Chicago, Robert Pape, has mapped the home counties of all of the roughly now 700 insurgents who've been charged with crimes on January 6th. Where do they come from? What is distinctive and interesting about those counties? They do not come from strong majority Trump counties. In fact, the higher the majority for Trump, the lower the probability that there's an insurgent that comes from there. They don't come from places where white people are losing jobs or losing income. The one interesting correlation he finds is that if the fraction of the population, if white people are declining in population in that county, then that county is much, much more likely to send an insurgent to the Capitol on January 6th. So these people are hearing about replacement. The ones who came to protest on January 6th are the ones who are seeing it happen in front of their eyes in their own hometowns.
That's really interesting data. One final question before I turn it back to James. You know a lot more about what happened. The reporting was just extraordinary. What are your expectations or hopes that the January 6th Commission will reveal, and will it make any difference?
Well, what happened on January 6th was the culmination and part of a coherent plan to overthrow the election. The job of the protesters on January 6th, the job of the insurgents, was to buy time, to stop the official electoral count by Congress, so that Trump had more time to bend the arms of legislators around the country and to get them to send alternate electors and throw away the preferences of the voters. I would like it if the January 6th committee can find the evidence of who organized it and for what, and what they were talking about and who was talking to whom. But I think it's got a much broader mission, which is a more important mission, which is there was a wide and deep conspiracy to overthrow an election. That has got to be ultimately filled with crimes. There have got to be crimes in this. If you try to take our democracy and tear it up and substitute one president for the one who was actually elected. And so I would like to see a much broader brief from the January 6th committee to look at the attempts to intimidate local officials against certification, the attempts to contrive fake evidence, the attempts to convince legislators to reverse the verdicts of their own voters. So I hope it goes well beyond the actual violence of January 6th itself and into the whole conspiracy to undermine the election.
James.
All right, so it's going to be a little bit of a winding thing, but I hope there's a point here, and I really didn't want you to address it. When I taught at Tulane, and I taught at LSU, and one of the things I always had was a cultural project. I told the students, you just can't come down here. You have to go somewhere and get out of your comfort zone. Go on a shrimp boat for a weekend, a black church, live under a bridge with homeless people. So two of my students, and they were like from New Jersey or Connecticut or something, actually spent the weekend in the Atchafalaya Basin with the militia. All right? And so I said, what did you see? He said, actually, they were kind of nice people. They had their kids out there. They were having softball games, and they all had potluck dinners, and they were sitting around telling stories. And I was sort of reminded of a Holocaust scholar, I think her name was Hannah Arendt, who called it the banality of evil. That we think these people are coming in the book of Revelations and they're going to have a fish for a head and one eyeball and horns and shit. And they're just like, we run into them every day. There are 21 million of them. Right? They look like us. They act like us. They're totally... unless you start a conversation with them or go to a Facebook post or maybe a bumper sticker, they're on surface, they view themselves as good, decent, God-fearing, family-loving Americans.
I think that's exactly right. And this is actually another point that Kathleen Bealey makes all the time, that that on the white supremacist side, which is just one subset of this group you're talking about, they are looking for family events. In fact, I mean, demography is everything to them, so they're looking for women to bear more children if they're the right kind of women. But yeah, I mean, they try to bury their message in family-friendly and community-friendly activities, and they know that people can't take the violent rhetoric in more than very small doses, and so they acculturate people slowly to the idea. So
we have these 21 million people, and according to you, and it certainly comports with everything that I've seen. I know some of these people. They're trying to deprogram is like trying to deprogram a pedophile. They just can't help it. They're just so deep into it, they're not coming out of it. I think you drew that conclusion, and I unfortunately agree with the conclusion. How does this end? How do we, 21 million out of 331 million is a lot of people. The actuarial tables include some of them, although the average age is 41.8, there's a lot of people under 41.8.
There's a lot of people under 41.8. Look, there's always been people who were dissatisfied with election results. There were always people who would have mumbled and muttered to themselves that it was fixed, right? Social media has allowed them to come together. But most crucially, the blessing of their delusions by leadership of their own party, by Trump first and foremost, but by all these other Republican politicians who know better. Because if you gave them truth serum, they know that Biden won the election. But they're either prepared to opportunistically to whip up a sort of naive belief in falsehoods by their supporters, or they're afraid of those people in the base. I think a lot of Republican politicians are just terrified of what the base would do to them if they departed from the official Trump storyline. And so if you have elites, politicians, leaders blessing the propaganda, blessing the fiction, then the people who've always been out there are going to be more mobilized and more ready to mobilize. And I think the only acceptable future is one in which the Republican Party eventually evolves to a place where it's ready to reject this fiction, this nonsense. Because as long as you have leaders pushing it, There are going to be plenty of followers who are right there with them.
Well, I'll turn it back over to Al, but to the extent the Republican Party is a reflection of the people who identify with it, a lot of them seem to be quite happy with its current direction. I'll leave it at that. But that's right there. Albert, go ahead.
No, there's a lot of. I think you're absolutely right, Bart. They're scared to death, and I just looked around at various states, elections for next year, Michigan and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Ohio. They're vying with each other to see who can out-Trump the other, who can outlie the lie. I mean, there are very, very few people. I mean, Liz Cheney and a handful of others that are standing up, but they're not very many. Bart Gellman.
There's a terrific piece in the Atlantic in this same issue with me by Tim Alberta.
It sure is, yeah.
It's a great piece I recommend in terms of taking a look at what the pressures are on a well-intended, newly elected Republican member of Congress who doesn't believe in the Trump nonsense and is trying to navigate his way through Republican politics, and it's a subtle look inside the head of this guy, which everyone should read.
Yeah, they sure should. And it's really, I mean, you can just see how torn the poor guy is. He did the right thing. He is a mainstream, he's from Jerry Ford's area of Michigan. But he really is he's a deeply torn and I think unhappy man. And Tim really captured that, I thought, Bart.
Yeah.
So Bart, one of the things I want to ask you is, you probably know more. It's reported, and I believe it, and most people don't. Now, you wrote the best single book ever on Dick Cheney, so you obviously know the Cheneys well. My wife worked for him for any number of times. I spent Christmases out in Jackson Hole when she was staffing him. How do you have an explanation for Liz Cheney? Just somebody, an observer who's spent time, knows this, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, she certainly has been like a pillar in all of this. And can you offer us some possible insight into how this came to be?
I think Liz Cheney is like her father in the sense that they are both true believers in their conservative philosophy. I mean, that even when Dick Cheney was lying, he was lying with a purpose, in a way that he regarded as principled. And he thought he was working for us. He wasn't sort of venal and corrupt in the sense that he was trying to privilege some private interest. He thought he was working for us, even if he was doing things that were just horribly mistaken. So Liz Cheney really believes what she says, and she is a small d Democrat. And she believes in this country, and she believes that you need a fair referee on an election, and that the count is the count, and the winner is the winner. And Trump is entirely unprincipled and transgressive in outrageous ways against many of the core beliefs she has. She's always, I think, loathed him. And when he attacked the actual institutions that make up our democracy, she just had to get off the bus.
Well, it's a pretty remarkable story because she's pretty out there alone, and I can understand where she's coming from. I just can't understand how these tens of millions of people just acquiesce in this. It's depressing, I'll be honest with you.
Well, it is. Bart Gellman, you have been a terrific guest, and anyone out there who has not read his Atlantic piece, Trump's Next Coup Has Already Begun, you ought to read it. You're going to be, as someone said, scared shitless after you read it, but you ought to read it because it's one terrific piece of reporting and chilling in its analysis. Bart, be well, and thank you so much for joining us.
I don't know anybody that hadn't read your piece, but I assume there's some out there. But thank you. That is a very valuable service to the country.
We'll get them. We'll find them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bart.
Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Terrific. Hey, we're all trying to eat better after Thanksgiving, but healthy breakfast doesn't have to be boring. And Magic Spoon, our favorite Magic Spoon, has the amazing flavors you love, but without all the bad stuff. And it's so good, you can eat it all day, any day. That's why we love Magic Spoon. 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. And it's only 140 calories a serving. It's keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb. Hey, man, James, you can't get much better than that. You can even build your own box and customize it to make your own custom bundle with Magic Spoon's delicious cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry, or cinnamon flavor. That's not all. I love to get in an argument with my 4-year-old grandchild about what's better, blueberry or peanut butter. I got some great news for the whole audience, which is Magic Spoon has brought back 2 super popular flavors, cookies and cream and maple waffle, permanently. So make sure you try them. They're delicious, they're indulgent, and they're healthy, James Carville.
Well, the thing what I like about Magic Spoon is I just don't consider it a breakfast food. I think it's an all day. People like they try to give you these healthy snacks that just taste awful. All right, it's just awful. I'm not going to call anybody by name, but these bars that sell you, they're inedible. All right, this stuff actually tastes good. It tastes good all day long. And by the way, if you got the munchies right before you go to bed, maybe you took a Coke or something, you can crunch down some Magic Spoon. It'd be really good, easy on your stomach when you wake up. I'm all for Magic Spoon, and it's a 24-hour-a-day product, I promise you.
It sure is. Go to magicspoon.com/warroom to grab a custom bundle of cereal. Try it today. And be sure to use our promo code WARROOM at checkout to save $5 off your order. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember, get your delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM to save $5 off. Thanks, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. Hey, James, once again, we have just so many good listener questions. The only problem is we can't get to them all, but we'll make a start. Let's start off from down under. Alan in Australia. He asked you, why don't Democrats get more aggressive? It seems like a foregone conclusion. The GOP is going to win the midterms, but the Republican division seems ready to explode. The Trump standard seems to be bullying for control. Is this potentially an election killer for them? Division is a kiss of death in Australia.
Well, I agree, and I'm so glad Australia got back in the mix because I love when we hear from people, and he's exactly right. Quit going back and forth with Lauren Boebert. Just ask her how she met her husband. Ask her to release a rap sheet because you can get it online. Democrats are always complaining and explaining. Quit that. Go for it. Okay.
Hey, James, our next question is from Colin in a city we both like, Mobile, Alabama. He's a Democrat in a slightly Democratic city in a slightly Republican county, Mobile, in a heavily Republican district, Alabama first. He said, I look around and I see Democratic gains in Georgia. Am I correct to think that these gains are coming to Mississippi and South Carolina? I believe that this is his view. As Democratic power slips in the upper Midwest, it's increasing in the South and Sun Belt. I see superstars like Birmingham's Randall Woodfin, and I have a lot of hope for the party. Colin, Georgia, North Carolina, maybe South Carolina. It's going to take a while. I'm not sure about Mississippi and Alabama. I think that's going to be I think it's going to be a long haul. But James, nobody, you know better than anybody.
I'm a son of the Gulf South, and if you want to get in a fight, get a New Orleans person and a Mobile person and argue which one has the oldest Mardi Gras. All right? And I think the fact is that Mobile celebrated Mardi Gras before we did, but I think that we'll have the record for continuously operating Mardi Gras. But to your question, I think the Atlantic South is way further ahead of turning Democratic than the Gulf South. But Atlantic South, I mean, Virginia, setback, but we're still in pretty good shape. North Carolina, which we're very, very, very competitive. Same is true in Georgia. I think less going to take a little more time, obviously, in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Arkansas, places like that. But I think there is some promising trends in the Atlantic South, less promising some in the Gulf South.
James, the next question is from John. He says, in the Sea Ranch, California. I think we've heard from the Sea Ranch before. I don't know if it was John
I think
not.
that's right. I think that's in San Diego County.
Yeah, I do too. He says, what on earth is going on with Vice President Harris? Staff walking out, occasional headlines of disarray. I'm too absorbed in other stuff and haven't read much about her, but she doesn't seem to be the right person to inherit the Democratic nomination when Biden doesn't run, either 24 or 28. Those in the know, what's happening? What is happening?
Boy, I don't know, but they do seem to get an inordinate amount of bad stories, and maybe the White House doesn't want them to push back or care or anything, but there's something. It seems to me from a distance that's off kilter here. And it's amazing how the White House doesn't do any more than necessary to kind of buck her up, and she doesn't do any more than necessary to buck herself up. And I don't know, but he's correct to make this observation. I don't know what to make of it, but it's clearly a legitimate observation.
Yeah, and a lot of Democrats, James, are worried about it. Whatever the reality, there's
I think what is the case is that if President Biden doesn't run for re-election in 2024, she's not going to clear the Democratic field. I mean, she may run, but I'll tell you she couldn't win, but there's no one going to sit in there and say, well, I'm not going to do it because Vice President Harris is in the race and she's essential. That's not going to happen. There'll be a lot of people running.
Hey, this is our Australia day, James. Rusty, he's in Western Australia. I wish Rusty would have told us where, but we'll take a few more than that. Some kangaroo country out there. We'll take any Aussie. He said I'm afraid if Putin attacks Ukraine, China will take advantage of us being distracted and attack Taiwan. The U.S. won't be able to do anything about it. During the Cold War, the U.S. planned on being able to deal with two wars simultaneously. Can they handle today a land war in Europe and a sea war in the Pacific? Shades of World War II. No, we can't. But I don't think China will base any decision on what it does with Taiwan. And I'm still rather hopeful that they won't. I think they'll create trouble with Taiwan. But for a whole lot of reasons, I suspect any kind of attack, certainly any kind of cross-channel attack, is highly unlikely. And I don't think it'll be affected by what happens with Putin and Ukraine. I don't know what Putin is going to do. He is he's a thug. He's an untrustworthy man. He knows that we're not going to send troops there. NATO's not going to send troops there. There will be sanctions that could be really painful. It may affect the sending gas to much-needed gas to Europe. But I guess I'm a little bit more worried about, even though China is much more important over the long run, I'm more worried now about what Putin might do in the short run. James? Well,
I've worked in the Ukraine earlier in this century, but not. And you got to realize, we think of a country, the eastern part of the Ukraine is very pro-Russian. It's a party of regions, right? It's blues, they call them. Mm-hmm. The western part of the Ukraine views itself more like Poland or Czechoslovakia. They kind of want to be part of the EU. And I wonder if before this ends that Russia, everybody wants the Ukraine to be one country, and it was a country, and it's completely legitimate, and it's recognized by the UN. And I don't think we're going to go to war over it, but it might be that the Russians just occupy the eastern part of the country, and you live with that. But I don't know, But I know they're not going to start a war over the Ukraine this far away. It's a vexing problem, to say the least. And I'm not a China expert, but I kind of agree with you. China has its own way of dealing with Taiwan, but boy, they showed it to Hong Kong. I think they're pretty ruthless and not be trusted. There's not much encouragement to take from the Hong Kong lesson.
No, there's not. Next, we have Chuck in Lake Lure, North Carolina, and a similar question from Ed in Fairfax, Virginia. James, what are your thoughts on the apparent lack of action by the Department of Justice in prosecuting the Trump team and associates for January 6th?
So, boy, this guy asks the money question. Because why isn't the Justice Department, why isn't Merrick Garland sent 50 FBI agents to this smash and grab stuff? And everybody says he's a great guy, he's a learned guy, he got mistreated, he's a person of high principle, he's a person of high moral integrity. My question is he a pussy? And I don't know the answer to that is not yes. I mean, we have all of this lawlessness right in front of us. We got the whole Mueller report. We got our friend Andrew Weissman. You got all of this stuff. It looks like he's shuffling paper to me. Now, maybe he has a long-range plan. A lot of people that I know, clearly a lot of people you know him, respect him, but dude, you got to show us something here. You can't. There's no the institutional integrity of the Justice Department depends on one thing: the enforcement of the laws of the United States. And whenever we are wondering, well, what's the effect if we enforce the laws? I don't know. Enforce the goddamn law. They're criminals. It's that simple. And but maybe, like I say, he might have a long-range plan, so I believe that escape door open for me, but I am not impressed.
Well, I hope so. I hope it's like our discussion earlier about the January 6th committee, that you have to build cases carefully.
Yeah, it could be.
I don't know that, James. I
don't either.
Saying that's my hope, because I'm as frustrated as you are.
But why are we not aggressively going after these smash and grab people?
Yeah.
I'm sure we got to...
Or even condemn them. Say anything about it. Talk about it. I mean, don't cede law and order to the Republican Party. That's insane.
Some of the stuff we're asking for some of these criminals seems to be awfully lenient to me, but...
Yeah. Our next question is from RM in Big Elk Meadows, Colorado. Not sure I know where Big Elk Meadows, Colorado is, but it sounds like a place I'd like to go. Yeah, and RM's okay, but tell us your name next time. He said he's baffled by how many Republican Party members have become crack addicts. They're still maneuvering the politics of this nation, and he finds it astonishing. He wants to jump ship, but he's worried about the Democratic Party being in total disarray, and he really wants to know, what's the strategy? When can we bring some common sense to this? And what I love, he adds, by the way, I love Craig Simmons' chat about the history of Pearl Harbor last week, and he's a big Magic Spoon fan. So, RM, we thank you for that. Let me tell you, I don't think we're going to get any common sense, if we will, until the Republican Party suffers a huge electoral defeat. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, they live in fear. And if the only thing, it's clear now that Trump didn't go away. It's clear now that they couldn't say, all right, now we can turn to the future, a conservative future to be sure. The only thing that will offer any hope, any promise of change, I'm not sure it will be a huge electoral defeat.
So this listener, I guess, the subscriber, he hits on exactly the question that I've been thinking about, and it goes to a large part of your profession, or used to be profession. There's a very good piece by Dana Milbank. It says that the press has been actually harder on Biden than Trump. Yeah. Okay, he uses some data to make his point. He may or may not be right, but it's pretty close. I mean, they've been just brutal on Biden. And brutal with a bias for bad news. The other thing that our listener is true about, and it's going to take me a little bit to answer this because it's very important to me. The only hope that you have is the Democratic Party. And I got to tell you, I've been a member of it all my life. And yes, it's convoluted, it's fucked up, It has different factions. It cobbles stuff together. It's a coalition, but it's all you got. That's it. And so does an ethical journalist, does an ethical commentator say, well, I'm going to have a balanced approach. I'm going to give as much time and as much effort to the destruction of the United States as I'm going to give to the salvation. Clearly no journalist in World War II would have said, but I got to tell the Japanese side of the story, or I got to tell the German side of the story. They're not two sides to the story. One side is utterly evil, and the other side is just fucked up. And that's the choice you got. And this rush to prove your I don't know, your virulence or your manhood, to say I can be just as tough on Biden as I can be on Trump. Well, the result of that, and maybe it's true, but if we lose this, reference our conversation with Bart, reference anything you see. If we lose this, we lose the whole shit and caboodle. And maybe it's time for, these right-wingers talk about patriotism. Maybe it's time for people to talk about patriotism, and we got to tell people exactly what's going on in this country. And it's not, well, the jobs number's good, but the inflation number's not very good. You didn't do very well in Virginia. And Politico writes the 50th story about dysfunctional Democrats. All right? At some point, somebody's got to say, hey, wait a minute here, dude. We're not living in 1995 again.
I'll give you a classic example of that, James. I started off, I subscribed to Punch Bowl. I thought it'd be interesting. They have good reporters. I get so goddamn sick and tired of exactly what you're talking about. I mean, Mitch McConnell has been as irresponsible as you can be on the debt ceiling. I'm not talking about January 6th or the big lie. The debt ceiling. Democrats helped extend it 3 times during the Trump years. You can't default. And he has just played games. It's going to come to a conclusion now. But, for weeks I've been reading, well, on the one hand and on the other hand. It's not.
Right. It's not. There was a time where there was on the one hand and the other hand.
Well, there still is. I mean, look, if you want to have an argument about taxes, you and I would have a view, and we would...
I think our review... One of the things that's happened over a period of time, we have learned that some things are just absolutely true. We did not know for sure that these childhood nutrition programs, a Head Start, we thought it would. It sounded like a good idea. All right? We did it. We now know it works. All right? We now know, people thought, maybe people like you and I didn't, that cutting taxes on rich people would have the effect of just making rich people richer and do nothing for the economy. Other people who we knew, to some extent were interested people, said, no, if you cut taxes on rich people, you'll flourish 1,000. It turned out we were right. All right, we have a whole body of experience in research. A lot of the questions that were ideological questions in the 80s and to some extent even the 90s have kind of been resolved. All right? But even at that point, you say, well, you just not resolved how much regulation is right or how much you need to. But we got one side that's debating questions, another side that's batshit 21 million people.
Yeah.
And a lot more silently or for violence. And these people get back in power, there's going to be no accountability.
Well,
none.
I agree. But I do draw a distinction, even though I have almost identical views of you on most of this stuff. I draw a distinction between, taxes, Social Security, whatever have you on the one hand, and the big lie and January 6th, and even, the debt ceiling on the other. I mean, some things, I may think one thing is 95.5. Those aren't 95.5.
Right.
That's just 100, but that's where they are.
Right. And one is like, just kind of greedy and selfish. The other is evil and criminal.
Right.
There's a difference between, but it is, and we're not even. I'd give anything to go back and argue, what tax cuts to the rich do. I think I could win that argument in my sleep. But at least they never. Arthur Laffer didn't try to kill anybody with his back of his envelope. All right?
Napkin.
I mean, it's like Jude Wanetsky never, if I see him in the airport, I wasn't scared he was going to overrun me, or even Novak. But, I mean, these people are like, this is a different breed of people we're talking about.
Oh, man. Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gatz. Anyway, RN, we loved your question. It got us going. So keep them up. Keep those questions coming. We love to hear from our listeners. We love our listeners. Thank you. Hey, winter is here, and there's no better time to find a comfortable spot to catch up on the classics or get through the books you've always wanted. And if you're like us, you love adding new content and information to your mental library. That's why we recommend Blinkist. Blinkist takes top nonfiction books and gives you the key takeaways in text and audio explainers called Blinks that you can digest in just 15 minutes. You can use Blinks to tackle procrastination, get started on developing an idea or business, take your projects to the next level, or dive into history with titles like The Prince by Machiavelli and Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. They've blinked thousands of titles in 27 categories. And if you like podcasts, and we know you all do, they blink those too with Shortcast. And it's all in one app, right in your pocket, so you can learn anytime, anywhere with Blinkist. James, you're a Blinkist guy.
I'm totally, and their output is prodigious. Is that the word I'm looking for? I don't know.
It's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, every time I turn around, they got something new coming up. Every time I open my email. And I don't know how, I honestly, one day I'd love to get one of these, I say guys, I have no idea what gender they are, on the show to explain how they do this. And it's amazing stuff. I'd like to see how this sausage is made. Yeah. It's that stunning when you read it, and it's not just the how good it is, it's how wide and voluminous it is, and how they just keep adding to it. I think it's a fascinating company. I don't know if you can buy stock in it or anything. We should look into that.
Well, we should, but you made that point before about them coming on sometime. So right now they have a special offer just for our audience out there. Go to Blinkist.com/warroom to start your free 7-day trial and get 25% off a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist. Blinkist.com/warroom to get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Blinkist.com/warroom, or look for the link in our show notes for this, as James would say, prodigious product. All right, James, now we have our outrage of the week. We may have to set a new rule that precludes Trump-related outrages because it's rip and read every week. But here goes. Devin Nunes, the ethically challenged California congressman, he disgraced the Intelligence Committee, and he once sued a cow. Anyway, he's quitting Congress. Some of it had to do with redistricting, but he's quitting to run the Trump social media gig. Now, if Republicans take control of the House, which they may, I fear, Nunes would have been chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. With its vast jurisdiction, taxes, health care, trade, welfare, pensions, it's one of the 4 or 5 most prized jobs in Congress. But it says a lot about Republican priorities these days that Nunes prefers the Trump scam even before it launches. There is an SEC investigation to being an important legislator. Trump and Devin Nunes, you deserve each other.
Well, my outrage is the inept Democratic strategy against Congressman Lauren Boebert. Because, well, you should censor her. You should do Kevin McCarthy. No, what you should do, what anyone would do, have you ever Googled Lauren Boebert rap sheet? You should sometimes. Have you ever investigated on your computer in your own time how Lauren Boebert met her husband? You really should sometimes. I have the equivalent of a PhD in White-Trashology, and I could write a dissertation about Lauren Boebert. According to my research, and I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, Congressperson Boebert, I would correct myself, but I think your husband introduced himself to you by showing you his penis. And I think there is a police report when you're sitting in a bowling alley. But that's one of the great come-on lines I've ever seen in my life, and I guess they lived happily ever after, as we'd say. Quit doing that and go tell the truth about these people. That caucus is full of what we would refer to where I live as white trash. They ought to be called out for it.
Well, they're losing one with Devin Nunes, but Lauren Boebert's still around. I couldn't agree more.
Man, I mean, just do your own research. But I've done my own research. It does seem that there's an arrest report there. And I don't know why we were sitting there whining about her and complaining and demanding someone censor. Just put out when Jason met Lauren. Maybe we'll make a Hollywood movie about it. Hi, Lauren. You want to see my dick? Oh, okay, good. Let's get married.
When Jason met Lauren, you've heard it.
You're right here. Get a good screen right on.
By the way, next week we are going to have our final 2021 Ivy League Sphincter Hall of Fame inductees.
And I got to say, Al Hunt's come up with some winners. I don't want to tease this too.
Right, we do, but if anybody has any ideas, they have to be Ivy League, they have to be genuine sphincters, and they have to be current.
I guess Jason and Lauren didn't go to an Ivy League school.
Well, I would suspect they didn't. If they did, they would be, I think they'd be the first couple that we ever inducted. We could have a ceremony. Anyway, next week. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Now, don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you'd check out the links to our sponsors, Magic Spoon and Blinkist, in the show notes. We thank you for supporting them. When you do, it helps make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our war room planning.
Hi, Lauren. You want to see my dick? Oh, okay, good. Let's get married.